Today, the state of Texas is set to execute Arthur Brown Jr.
52-year-old Arthur Brown killed 2 men and 2 women in Houston,
including a woman who was 7 months pregnant.
Arthur Brown Jr. was convicted of killing a pregnant woman and 3 others.
He denied killing these 4 people in that home on Brownstone Lane.
He was convicted of killing 4 people during a 1992 Houston drug deal.
What do we want?
Stop execution!
What do we want it?
Now!
Arthur Brown's crime. 52-year-old man Arthur Brown Jr. was convicted for the manslaughter of 4 people, including a 9-month pregnant woman in 1992. On the 20th of June that year, a drug deal took place at a residence on Brownstone Lane in Houston, Texas. Marianne Dudley, Arthur Brown Jr., and Tony Dudson had gone to the home of Jose and Rachel Tovar to buy 3 kilograms of cocaine when they decided to rob them of their drugs and money. The trio proceeded to tie up the 6 people that were inside the house, who include the Tovar family and their neighbor. They ended up shooting all of them execution style. By the time authorities arrived, 3 of the victims, Jose Tovar, Frank Farias, Jessica Quinones, who was 9 months pregnant, were found unconscious. Of the other 3 who survived, Rachel Tovar, Nicholas Crotez, and Audrey Brown the neighbor, Audrey later lost her life in a hospital, making the total number of murder victims 4. The remaining 2 survivors were able to identify Dudley, Brown, and Dunson as their attackers. The killers departed the crime scene and later left town after they became aware that authorities were searching them as suspects. The group acquired a Jeep Cherokee and persuaded 2 ladies to drive them across Alabama and into Kentucky. Once there, they used fake names to buy tickets to a plane to Ohio. Then they headed north after leaving Columbus. Police were able to spot a sports car they thought belonged to Dudley, but it failed to provide them with any new leads. Dudley, Brown, and Dunson's mothers begged their sons to come forward, despite believing they were innocent. On July 8, 1992, Dudley and Dudson were caught at a trailer near Fayetteville, North Carolina, while Brown was captured later on October 23 in an apartment in Northport, Alabama. The 3 perpetrators were convicted of capital murder. Dudley and Brown were sentenced to death, while Dunson was sentenced to life in prison. Police said that Jose Tovar and his wife Rachel Tovar sold cocaine to Brown, who was a member of a ring that transported drugs from Texas to Alabama. At trial, Rachel Tovar and Cortez both identified Brown as their assailant, but Tovar gave conflicting information to police in the hospital, and Cortez has earlier failed to pick Brown out of a photo lineup, according to court filings. In Dunstan's subsequent trial, Cortez again failed to identify Brown from photos. Brown's appeal. Brown made numerous attempts to challenge his conviction. After claiming that he should be given $7,500 to pay for a mitigation specialist to help him with his clemency plea, Brown was unsuccessful in his appeal before a federal court in August of 2014. Upon a federal district court's denial, the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals sustained the refusal of the lower court. When the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals refused to grant Brown a new trial or new sentencing phrase in October 2017, Brown lost a second appeal. The Supreme Court also declined an appeal from Brown's attorneys to halt the execution when they had argued that Brown was exempt from the execution because he was intellectually disabled. The High Court has prohibited the death penalty for the intellectually disabled. It was claimed that Brown's intellectual limitations were known to his friends and family, and that those who knew him over the course of his life have described him consistently as slow. Attorneys provided evidence that Brown had been in special education classes since he was a young child and was deemed educable mentally retarded in elementary school. In 3rd grade, his IQ was measured at 70, generally considered within the range of intellectual disability. Brown's attorneys also noted he was typically thought of as a slow learner throughout his life, and his friends and family had to learn to talk to him in simple language. Brown's lawyers also argued that a witness actually implicated another suspect and claimed Brown's conviction was tainted by racial bias, alleging one of the jurors decided he was guilty because he was black. Josh Rice, chief of the Post-Conviction Writs Division with the Harris County District Attorney's Office in Houston, said that Brown's crime was an absolutely brutal mass murder and that families of the victims deserved justice. Brown had exhausted all of his appeals and was set to be executed in April 2022 by a judge in the 351st District Court. Prosecutors and defense lawyers made an effort to influence the Harris County Court to issue a death warrant for Brown in May 2022. As Brown's attorneys argued, he was ineligible for execution because of an intellectual disability. Prosecutors tried to persuade the judge to set the date for his execution for August 31st. Family relatives of the victims were furious when the court refused to sign Brown's death warrant on May 20. A Harris County District Attorney's prosecutor declared after the verdict that they would appeal the judge's ruling. Protests for Brown's execution. The group Death Penalty Action called on Governor Greg Abbott to stop the execution of Brown, who has been on death row for 30 years. They tried to push for more time for more evidence to be heard.
Death Penalty Action protesting against the scheduled execution of Arthur Brown.
The murders and Brown's subsequent trial were sensational, with allegations of police and prosecutorial coercion of witnesses, shocking recantations on the stand, and Brown's sister taken into custody in contempt and later charged with perjury. 3 of Brown's sisters testified for the state, placing Brown at one of their houses in Houston the night of the murders after a drug buy, according to court documents. 2 said he offered to pay them to take his van filled with drugs back to where he lived in Alabama, where he flew home the next day. After being held in contempt for initially refusing to testify despite having been granted immunity, one sister, Carolyn Momal, testified that Brown had told her he had shot 6 Mexicans. On cross-examination, Momal said her earlier statement was false, and she and the other sister said on the stand that they testified because police had threatened to take their kids away if they did not. The founder of Virgin Group, Richard Branson, detailed his thoughts and urged people to sign a petition to help save the man. He said that for Brown, this movement may come too late and that his life is on the line. He also said that Texas courts need to halt the execution to allow for DNA testing and for Brown's new lawyers to present evidence of his innocence because the good people of Texas should not stand for the death of an innocent man. Brown's verdict. The death warrant for Brown was signed on August 17, 2022 by the same judge who had earlier refused to approve the death warrant in May. On the afternoon of March 9, 2023, the United States Supreme Court rejected Brown's request for a stay of execution. Brown was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas on March 9 of 2023. In his final words, he declared his innocence and said that the state was carrying out the execution of an innocent man. He said he'd proved his innocence, but the courts blocked him. He also said in a loud voice how the state hid the evidence so long and good that his own attorneys couldn't find it. He was looking at the ceiling of the death chamber while strapped to a gurney and not making any eye contact with a half-dozen relatives of his victims who watched through a window a few feet from him. As the lethal dose of the sedative pentobarbital took effect, he took 2 deep breaths, gasped, and then began snoring. After 6 snores, all movement stopped. He was pronounced dead 17 minutes later at 6:37 p.m. Dudley was also executed by lethal injection on January 25, 2006, while Dunson remains incarcerated today at the Huntsville unit and is eligible for parole in 2027. Brown was the 9th inmate to be executed in the US and the 5th this year in Texas. Before the execution, Quiñones' older sister, Maricela Quiñones, said, "I don't see how anybody could have just killed a pregnant woman and then made her suffer so much. It's just beyond words." Before the execution, the rest of the family who witnessed Brown's execution issued a statement in which they described the execution day as one of profound relief and gratitude rather than joy or celebration, saying, "After 30 years of anguish and uncertainty, they were finally able to rest, knowing the monster who destroyed so many lives will never again torment the body or soul of another." That's all for today's video. See you next time.